Matt, welcome to Product Growth Stories. I'm so excited to have you here. So we're going to talk about Belmar and your experience running a service provider. And doing B2B sales in the Salesforce solution engineering space. I'm so happy to have you on the show. Can you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Belmar?
Yeah, absolutely. Good to be here. So Belmar, we are a Salesforce implementation firm that is a full service provider, ultimately implementing technology on the Salesforce platform for nonprofits, public sector organizations, as well as for-profit organizations. We've got offices on the West Coast in British Columbia, as well as down in Florida as well. But yeah, happy to be here. Happy to share hopefully what are some interesting insights, but I guess out on that one.
Yeah, happy to have you here. So one of the things I'd love to talk about right now is just enterprise sales. I know if you're selling anything related to Salesforce, it's leaning more in that direction because those are traditionally, that's who's getting Salesforce. And I think right now, the last I checked, the enterprise sales cycle on average is 211 days, which is really difficult. It's really difficult.
Yeah.
What have you noticed in terms of enterprise sales, and what do you see as best practices to reduce that as much as you can?
I think the reality is that the reason it takes so long is because for a lot of organizations, they only get one go at it. I'll give you an example in the nonprofit space. Oftentimes, these are large nonprofits that they've been raising money. This is a capital campaign that has been for many, many years. So they only get one kick at the can. And because of that, there's RFP process, there's due diligence that needs to occur because they got to make sure they get it right. So what have I noticed throughout that? I think if you look at this as a transaction, you're in for a whole world of hurt. It's oftentimes in ways that you can expedite this, it's relational. It's understanding the pain points, as cliche as it sounds, it's understanding pain points, but it's really understanding the people that are trying to solve the problem and why that problem is important to them. That there's always going to be process, and there's some things that you can't fast track no matter how much you want, no matter how much I want. But ultimately, if you can better understand that problem, better understand the people, you can better understand how you're going to solve that problem. And that has certainly paid dividends. I don't know if it's 200 and I don't know how many days you said, but
211.
It's 211. Wow, that's a long time. It's crazy when you actually hear the number. That's just that.
Yeah, I've noticed that the time sales cycles are actually increasing both on enterprise and on consumer. So the average consumer consideration phase for like a normal thing is 67 days. And we're not talking about a $250,000 program there. It still takes quite some time. Yeah, I definitely hear you, because at the end of the day, it's people that actually matter, right? It's people that are getting these things done.
Mm-hmm.
So what else do you find helps as you're doing Salesforce implementations? You get this different view into different companies about how they run their sales processes, how like tight the ship is run. And I'd love to know, what are the patterns that you see in a sales organization that sets it apart, where you look at their numbers and, okay, these guys are going to really exceed what their competitors can do with a similar size sales team.
Yeah. And as it pertains to a sales cycle and how do we expedite some of that as well, I think beyond the people and the relationship that I had mentioned as well, I think it's also framing what the ROI is. And that ROI is oftentimes not known. The questions are sometimes not known to be asked up front. It's kind of like asking somebody you're trying to sell something to somebody and they've never had eyes on this before. They don't even know what to ask. So being able to inject your insights, what you've learned and your experience, I think that's the secret sauce there. Telling them what they don't know quite yet, or telling them the questions that they should be asking and framing the solution to that. That's helpful. And that certainly helps to frame okay, I can make this jump. I'll give you an example. And I think you said 67 days for a consumer. I'm not in the category where I take long to make decisions.
Me neither.
Yeah, exactly. I recently ran a half marathon. And so now I'm in this just total running cycle, but I was evaluating watches that could track my heart rate, all of these kind of things. And there's so many helpful articles. There's 1,000 blog posts you can find online that compare. But ultimately what helped for me was being able to answer the questions that I didn't know that I was looking for. For example, and I don't know if there's runners that listen to this, things like your lactate threshold or your VO2 max, things that I didn't even know that you could be tracking, but that will yield you benefits when you're running long distances. as well. To wrap that all up, it's being able to answer the questions and tell and share insights to these are the questions you should be asking that they haven't even considered yet. And this is how you're going to go about solving it. That's a true value add.
Yeah, this reminds me of an excellent consultant. When you bring in a consultant, you know that there's a problem. Otherwise, you would not be talking. And
Totally.
usually, and consultants out there, you can all relate to this, I'm sure. As a consultant, 10 levels further, because you've solved that problem like 100 times, and usually the person with the problem has no idea like where it connects. And
That's
so you
it.
can show them like what they didn't even know to ask. I love that. That reminds me of the challenger sale. Do you think that's still a valid model today?
Sorry, did you say challenger?
Yeah, the challenger sale process where you're really looking to educate them, but also change their viewpoint in what the problem is.
Yeah, certainly. Like I said, sometimes you don't know which questions to ask. Sometimes you also don't know which direction you're going. I'm a big believer, and perhaps this is just product to making those quick decisions. I'm a big believer that motion is more important than direction. Once you get started, it's easier to figure out, are you going down the right path? Are you solving the right problem as well? Versus sitting there. And I know that's very counter to an enterprise sales cycle in which it's taking 260, 200, however many, 211, I forget the number.
211.
But I strongly believe that motion is greater than direction, because once you start going, you can iterate and you can solve.
Oh, preach
Also,
to the choir, man.
yeah. And I think framing and that's why we take a crawl, walk, run approach, or this MVP approach as well when you're going about solving that problem. It helps for the organizations that are able to think this way, break it down into manageable bites as well. Instead of looking at it as a big holistic silver bullet solution, it's okay, what can we solve first to deliver faster value? And I think that, back to your challenger question, it certainly reframes the questions to be answering in the forefront in that sales cycle.
Yeah. And if you're breaking it down, it can also make it less risky, because it just does for project management. It makes it less risky to not try and eat the moon in one bite. But you can say with a smaller project, we have a smaller timeline, smaller risk, smaller ROI, but at least we got started. Like, we're learning something from doing. I see that all the time. I'd love to ask you about something that I've seen in enterprises. So
Sure.
this is a problem I have experienced. And that's, okay, if you have something and you want to solve a problem, you want to take this lunch and learn, crawl, walk, run approach, that means, like, by definition, your project ROI will be smaller, right? Some companies like to greenlight projects in terms of net present value, right? So if you're going to attack a smaller problem with a smaller risk, which is not in the MVP, in the net present value, you're going to have a smaller return. And then if you say, you know what, actually, we're going to do the fully automated solution, solve it, knock it out of the park, huge solution, get rid of the problem entirely, on paper, that project will always look better. Have you ever encountered this issue with your solutions, and how do you get around this problem?
Yeah, it's a very fair objection to have as well on, okay, if we wait to do this, let's say 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, if we wait a little bit, on paper, like you said, that metric looks a lot better. But I think and there's no right or wrong answer to this. It largely depends on what you're trying to accomplish as an organization. But I think something to consider that a lot of people don't consider is the opportunity cost of the time lost. So if you can present value right now, even if it's not the full value, if you're, instead of having to wait 2 years, what would have occurred, or what would have changed in that 2-year time cycle? It's kind of like investing. And again, I'm not giving investing advice, but time in market, you're taking advantage of that time construct. So much can change. Whereas if you just get started and have something there, some value
Buy
to
and
show,
hold, guys.
buy and hold. Exactly. But and I think that is a component that doesn't get weighed, because that number,
Yeah.
we have to account for the time lost, the opportunity cost of what could we have done differently if we had just had something to track at that start. That makes sense?
That completely makes sense to me. I feel like that is hard there are these things that are true and they are difficult to demonstrate. And that somehow makes a challenge when you're trying to aim for something more iterative, more fast-paced, quicker learning. There's these elements, like you're saying, like time to value could be a few weeks if you have a ninja team on that problem. But it's difficult to give. So many assumptions are baked into, okay, how do we put in the opportunity cost for the whole org? It's I've never solved this one.
Yeah. And I suppose you could say the same with that longer or that bigger project, if you will. There's so many assumptions that are baked into the ROI that this will yield, not accounting for over a typical implementation. Let's even call it a 1-year implementation. What has changed during that cycle? Are the initial assumptions and metrics and the ROI calculations still in fact true? Oftentimes those don't get revisited, right? The requirements may change, but those initial, what are we going to get as a result of this? We don't refactor that. So I think it can go both directions, right?
That's very fair. Yeah. You have grown Belmar by quite a bit, and I'd love to hear some of the story and some of what are the key things you've learned along this journey to grow your solutions provider.
Yeah, I think it's this exact same thing that we were talking about in terms of sales cycle and time to value. It's that you just got to get started. And I think I'm a big believer in decision fatigue and analysis paralysis, however you want to call it. Oftentimes the best results that we've yielded is when we just get going. We learn so much faster once you just start going. I'll give you an example here. We grew into a couple different markets, different verticals, if you will. And a lot of that we could have planned and put together a 30, 60, 90, that's a short-term basis, or a multi-year plan. The reality is once you actually get going, you learn a lot faster. You fail. It's like the age-old saying, you fail fast and you learn quicker, right? So the faster we were failing, faster we were learning as well. And that type of quick iterative learning and that iterating at a really high pace really yielded us benefit, but it's also very contagious for the team. That's a contagious energy for, hey, we are building something, and reframing the mind of we're now building something together versus there's a grand plan that we're all following this blueprint. That's something that really helped us grow, both mentally as a team and just getting stronger, more resilient, but also it's contagious to the market as well. People see and they want to be part of a rocket ship.
I love that. I feel like this is just general life wisdom. It applies outside of business too. That I don't know. I see this all the time where executives or leaders, you're trying to plan your way to information that you don't have. There's no more planning is going to reduce the risk and make the decision more sure. And if you can find a better use of time is like, how do we reduce the cost to learn if it works? How do we reduce the risk to giving it a reasonable shot?
Yeah. And don't get me wrong. You still need goals. You still need something that you're working towards. But I think it's not resting and placing all your bets on, okay, we need to hit this plan. It's got to go exactly like this. Because the reality is 4 years ago, I didn't account for the fact that we'd be entering a global pandemic. How can you plan for that, right?
Yeah, you didn't plan for that one either.
That wasn't in our leadership planning sessions, right?
Yeah.
So being able to have goals, be flexible, but just understand that just take it little by little and just start iterating. The faster you iterate, the faster you will find out what works and what doesn't work. But that's the most important part is if you gather that feedback and you see something's not working and you don't do anything about it, then shame on you. But if you're iterating, as long as you are iterating and improving things and changing things and trying different things, that's all you can ask for, right?
As someone designing solutions, this puts you in the agency space, somewhere I'm in as well. And there are certain behaviors that I see when I see them from a client. I think, okay, they're going to crush it. These guys are going to win. Where we can take the same program and in another organization, it will be more difficult for them to win. And I know everybody who runs an agency knows what I'm talking about. There's some kind of client side behaviors that really enable their own success. I'm curious, without naming names, of course, what are the patterns that you see that are big red flags that it's going to be a difficult project or it might fail when you look at the client's behaviors?
Yeah. Maybe I'll flip it from red flags to green flags, like things that I know will yield benefit. And I've seen a lot of positive impact of this. Ultimately, it's how bought in your leadership team is. Is this a bottom-up approach or a top-down approach? In terms of the approach to participating in the project cycle, to the training, to the learning, are you gamifying and making that learning of this new technology fun? I've seen some really successful organizations where the lunch and learns, the CEO is participating in those lunch and learns, getting everybody involved, and they're creating time. They're blocking off time in the day for people to go learn. That to me suggests that there's a ton of alignment as to the outcomes of this project. And because there's a ton of alignment, the adoption rates are so high. Because the worst that can happen is you spend a pile of money, you implement technology, and nobody uses it.
No one
uses
it. Tragedy.
Yeah, and they use it and they use it all wrong, and you're not getting that ROI that you said you would get at the start. All of that rests on the fact that you're using the system. So I've seen that really impact successfully is when there's been just a total top down, getting involved with the learning, participating in the lunch and learns, leading the lunch and learns. That's been really, really impactful. So the flip side of that, the red flags, is when there's people that are executive stakeholders and sponsors that participate on the sign off initially, but don't really engage, really involve themselves until either something's gone really well or gone something really badly. And that oftentimes is a recipe for maybe not the results that you're looking for. I won't say failure, but just maybe not the results that you're looking for from the form.
Yeah, if you look at someone's calendar, this is the secret to knowing what they value.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh, it's excellent, excellent. There are so many people that use Salesforce. What is your sweet spot? What's the main transformation that you help when someone comes to you and they need custom implementation or they need some help? Where do you get them to? What's the goal?
There's a lot of organizations, and we serve, like I said, nonprofits, public sector, and for-profit organizations, typically in that mid-market space. So anywhere from 10 million in rev to 100 million rev and employee count. There's 1,000 different definitions on how you can categorize that. But typically success for us is this organization could have been either on paper, it could have been in filing cabinets, they could have been doing things very manually, to they could have been on a legacy system that was homegrown. Somebody said, hey, let's do it this way. And they've just,
let's build a CRM.
Let's go build this ourselves. And they've just been ultimately handcuffed to this solution that's holding them back. And I'll speak to nonprofits and the patterns that we see as well. The reality is that the demographics for donors is changing. There's a lot of shift to digital. There's a lot of shift to text to give. There's a lot of shift to online recurring donations as well. So being able to A, meet this new age of donors where they're at, but also B, tell the story where it's going to be heard is so important these days. So being able to modernize, but even just get to current state of what the world is in as it pertains to technology for these organizations is oftentimes success. I reference Crawl, Walk, Run. That is certainly, if you're in a filing cabinet, anything's going to be better than that. Being able to track a non-filing cabinet. So that's what we see as success.
Excellent. Excellent. Matt, thanks so much for your time. This has been fascinating. And I'm curious, as we wrap up, what would be your number one piece of advice for other business operators in 2025 for success?
I said it earlier, motion is more important than direction. Just get started, get moving. You will figure the pieces will fall in place. People call it a bunch of different things, building the plane as you're flying it, getting to know the tips of your skis. But ultimately, motion is greater than direction. If you just get started, you will figure out if you're going the right way or wrong way. So don't wait, just do.
Love it. Love it. Thanks so much, Matt.
No problem. Happy to be here.